Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. I'm Evan Owens, and I have an incredible guest on today, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author many times over. She's well known for books like You're Already Amazing, Fierce Hearted, The Powerful Purpose of Introverts. But today we're actually going to talk about her newest book coming out, which is all about a subject that I know we've all experienced, anxiety. So if you've ever felt overcome by anxiety, you're going to want to stick around for today's special episode with Holley Gerth. Here we go. Hey, I'm Evan Owens, founder of Reboot Recovery, host of the Reboot Recovery Show, and lover of cinnamon rolls. We'll say that's what I'm loving today. I'm really glad you've chose to join us for this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. It's been an exciting season so far with lots of different guests. We've had some people from the Reboot staff join us. We've had some of our leaders join us. We've had people who are fellow authors. But today is one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most. One, just because, there's very few people that I've sort of been able to get to know that are way ahead of me in the author journey. They've been through it, done their got the t-shirt, but also who write about subjects of really how to maximize our potential as people. And that's something that this guest today that I know you're going to want to hear from is an expert in. So Holley, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Evan.
All right, so first things first, Holley. So Holley Gerth, if you Google her name or go to Amazon, which I encourage all of you to do, for one, she has a brand new book coming out, which we're going to talk about today. But the first thing you're going to find is that you have, 74 different books you've released so far? I mean, how many books, what number book is this new one?
I think this is number 20, so that is quite a few. I think they're a little bit like kids. After a while, you lose track, So, but yes, I've been happy to be able to write several books. My grandparents had a Christian bookstore, and that was my dream growing up. So it's been really fun that it's been able to come true.
That's right. Now, some of you all listening, you guys haven't even read 20 books, let alone written 20 books. I know, let's be honest now about that, right? And so I want to go back because now I'm late to the game, Holley, so you'll have to know this. But when I first came to know of your books, I was introduced to you through a friend of mine who is a highly successful introvert. He is a very introverted person, but he's managed to build this very successful company. And he said, hey, there's this book that I've read. If you ever want to understand it, you should read this book by this author. Her name's Holley Gerth. It's called The Powerful Purpose of Introverts. And that's where I got introduced. And so I assume you wrote this from your own. You are a self-proclaimed overcomer of introvertism, that you've not overcome it, but you've maximized yourself through being an introvert. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. That's probably my favorite book that I've written. I don't know if you're supposed to have favorites, but it definitely came out of my own journey. So I have a little 1-minute quiz to see what percent introvert you are, and I scored 96%. So I'm way up there. And
So if I want,
I found.
if
Go
I wanted to
ahead.
take that, where do I go for the quiz? I want listeners to know. Where do I go?
That's on my site, holleygerth.com, and there's a little tab for introverts. You can find it on there.
Okay, so, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you go ahead. So you took your
Yeah,
score and it was 90, what?
96%. So that's about as high as you can go on the introvert scale.
So what does this mean exactly? Because so I'm an extrovert, I believe. I enjoy being around people. I get energy from being around people. So I have a difficult time. My wife is more of an introvert. I can tell when she needs that time to sort of regroup and re-energize. But I guess, let me ask you this. Are there certain things that introverts struggle with that extroverts don't, and extroverts struggle with that introverts don't? Not just in terms of social pressures, but in terms of maybe certain mental health things, certain emotional health things. Are there kind of trends there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that being an introvert or extrovert is about people, when in really it's about how our brains and nervous systems are wired. And so introverts just are in our sweet spot when we have a little bit less coming at us from the outside. We take everything in. We're very observant. We catch detail. We often are highly empathetic, in tune with people. So related to your question, research does show that introverts can struggle more with things like anxiety and depression. And they're still looking into why, but it looks
Hmm.
like it's related to that. Like, obviously, if you're just more impacted by what's going on around you, then over time that can have a cumulative effect. The strength side of that is we are tend to be observant and empathetic in those things. And so
Yeah.
I think that is helpful to be aware of. And I think for introverts and extroverts, those core parts of who we are come with struggles and strengths. So it's just about understanding that and moving more toward the strength side.
Yeah, that's so good. And I feel like, obviously the listeners of this show are people who are either helping people overcome trauma or in the process of overcoming or have overcome trauma in their lives. And sometimes that happens when we're young, before the age of 18. Others of us, I think it's happened when we're older. But as we talk about this issue of trauma, which is kind of the theme of this show, one of the things that a lot of times I hear people say is they say, I wonder who I would have been or what I might have been like if it weren't for the experiences I had when I was young. How much those experiences
Yeah.
shaped me. And there's almost this journey of almost finding our true self, finding our true identity, that
Mhm.
as we kind of progress through it, we have to almost discover that. And I find that a lot of times with trauma people, you think that they would close kind of inward, right? That they would, but sometimes they become people pleasers, right? So they become this really likable, affable kind of personality. Sometimes they do close in. I'm wondering, in all of your research around this, and obviously you've written a lot of books about subjects like introverts or subjects like fear, subjects like hurt. You've written books on these subjects. So I'm wondering, in all of your research and writing, how have you seen how these experiences really shape who we become, and sort of what power do we have to choose who we become versus sort of just saying, well, I'm just a product of A, B, and C?
Yeah. Well, I think someone who's taught me a lot about this is my daughter Lavelle. She's almost 30. So her story is that we couldn't have kiddos. She didn't have parents. She aged out of the foster system. God
Mm,
connected us when she was about 20, and she's now been our kiddo for almost a decade. She's now has kids of her own, but
wow.
she went through a lot of trauma, and she's taught me so much about resilience and what it
Yeah.
looks like to not let that define you. When we first met her, she had walls that were so thick. And she would tell you that if she were on this show. And I have watched her say, you know what? These are things that happen to me, but they are
Mm,
not my identity. And so
amen.
I think that's one thing. I think one of the most toxic things about trauma is shame, right? It's
Right.
almost like an open wound, and shame is what the enemy of our hearts and souls wants to infect that with. So I think
Yes.
we as humans tend to be incredibly resilient. I think shame is the danger. And shame starts when we start believing we are our struggles, we are what has happened to us. And that, thankfully, is not the reality. That, yes, those things are painful and worth grieving over and absolutely getting all the help we need healing
Right.
from. But there is a core essence of who we are that I think nothing on the outside can alter. And that is our worth and our value and our belovedness. And I think the more we take hold of that, the more we're able to start to heal.
Yeah. We work with a lot of people, but one of the segments we work with a lot is veterans and first responders, and there's so much, everybody, I think, to some degree finds their worth and their identity in their work, but I believe in those types of careers it's that much more amplified, right? That there's this idea
Mm.
that I am my badge, I am my uniform, I am my rank, I am my role, and my service to my country or to my community is who I am. And then when I lose that, all of a sudden now there's this void in my life, and there's all this trauma, all of this emotional pain that starts to kind of chase me, that kind of catches up with us. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on the show, is because I think that um, there are a lot of books on the subject of emotional and mental health, but a lot of them fall into one of kind of two camps. They're either highly clinical, meaning they're not super approachable by the average reader, or they're sort of fluff and just kind of happy-go-lucky, immaterial kind of encouragement. And I think that your writings really do an interesting balance. And part of that is your background, I think, as a licensed counselor, but part of that also is maybe your faith showing through. But I think you do a great job of taking subjects that are heavy, right? And being able to infuse both encouragement, positivity with some of those difficult truths. And I think that some of our listeners who are kind of in that journey of finding their identity now after some of the traumas, I know are going to be encouraged by some of your writings, that you've written about. So that's why I was excited to have you on. And so I want to talk about this new book, What Your Mind Needs for Anxious Moments. What Your Mind Needs for Anxious Moment. It comes out later this month. If you are going to buy a book this fall, go buy Healing What's Hidden, which is Jenny and I's book, and then go buy this book at the same time. If you order them both, I'll like you even better. I don't really have a gift I can send you, but I'll like you even better. So tell us the origin of this, because this is kind of a series of what your fill in the blank needs for blank, right? I mean, you have a series of these that kind of has led up to this, correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I think it's more, I write what I need to remember, I write
Good.
out of my own journey. And I've struggled for my entire life with anxiety. When I was 8 years old, I was this kiddo who kept having stomach aches and going to the nurse's office. And my parents took me for all kinds of medical tests. And back then they finally said, oh, it's stress. And looking back, it was anxiety. This
Right.
was when that wasn't talked about as much. I remember
Right.
sitting in a counselor's office in my early 20s and her having me fill out an assessment and saying, hey, you have diagnosable anxiety, social anxiety of all things. And so I have been on the journey of trying to figure that out for myself. And as I do that, I tend to find out I'm not the only one who struggles with something.
Yeah.
And then that turns into books. And so, yeah, has my faith journey in there, but it also has brain science and all the psychology I could gather up. It has stories from all the people I've talked with who also struggle with anxiety. It's everything that has actually been helpful to me through
Yeah.
many years gathered up in one place.
And it's a 60-day guide. So is it meant to be read one chapter or one topic per day? Is that kind of how you divided it up? Or is it 60 days just kind of the recommended length?
Yeah, it has 60 days where you can read
Okay.
a little bit every day. And I think that helps because then we can actually apply. I think all of
Yes.
us feel like we have way too much information. What we're really looking for is transformation. And so I tried to make it really applicable to our daily lives. So the thought is each day you read through, you get the encouragement you need, but you also get some practical things to try out and see what works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting. So the subject of anxiety is one that is, definitely highly discussed, right? I mean, if you go on the TikTok of the world, which I do not TikTok, I TikTok occasionally, but I don't TikTok. What was it like? I think that one of the challenges we even faced in writing, and we've written curriculums, et cetera, is, it's that balance between trying to say something truly original, but also reminding us of maybe what we've already known and forgotten, and sort of those balance of those two things. So as you started to sit down, and I don't know your writing process, I'd love to hear about it, but as you sit down and you say, I'm going to write about a subject which is trending, which is there's lots of content being produced on the subject of anxiety, and you sit down and you say, here's the main objective for the book, or here's the key thing I want this project to be known for. Kind of what went through your brain as you decided to pick the title, pick the topic, pick the chapters that you put into it? What were some of the main objectives that you wanted to accomplish?
Well, this particular book really started with one question. I wonder if anyone in the Bible ever struggled with anxiety. And I started looking, and yes, from
Yes.
Genesis through the end, so many people. So every day is a different story from someone in the Bible struggling with anxiety. And some people handled it
Got it.
really well, and I learned from them. And some people handled it terribly, and I
Right.
learned from them.
Right.
And so that I think is kind of a unique perspective. We think, oh, yeah, people in the Bible had it all together. They didn't struggle with anxiety back then. Oh, yes,
Right.
they totally did. Sometimes even more, because usually they were about to die if they were
Right.
struggling with anxiety.
Right.
So
Right.
that really was the inspiration and helped me look at this subject from a new level of saying, what is the thread and some ancient truth that we can still
I
apply
love it.
today. And then combining that with other things I'd gathered up, like I just mentioned the brain science and insights and
Hmm.
stories, and just where
Wow.
I've been in my journey too.
No, I love that, and that's actually always been. Anytime I talk to a lot of the people who go through our programs, friends of ours are not people of the Christian faith, and a lot of times, when I'm trying to sort of say this is one of the reasons I'm a Christian, and I always say is if I wrote a book about myself, I would paint myself in a way better light than what the Bible does when they
Yes,
write about themselves, right? I mean, we read these stories like this person's kind of a dirtbag, like
yeah,
he's kind of a
totally.
terrible person,
Yeah,
yeah, and you're right. I could see anxiety now. It's not labeled this, but I would imagine suddenly realizing you were naked in the Garden of Eden would be a pretty anxious and fearful moment of like
yeah.
we are nude. How about that? I would
Yeah,
imagine that would be
yeah.
a emperor without the clothes kind of phenomenon,
Yes. Yeah,
literally.
so much of the Bible is inappropriate for Sunday school, which is
Yeah.
ironic, right? Yeah.
Were-
So,
Is there any
so
one
my hope.
story that? Go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go,
Go ahead.
please.
I was just gonna say, I hope my hope would be, even if someone's listening and they're like, I'm not into the faith thing, that they could still love learning from this, because there's stories about
Yes.
people being very human. Like that's what it is, having very human moments where they're afraid and trying to figure something out and don't have the answers, just like we do today.
Yes.
So that would be my heart, that if faith is part
I
of your
love it.
life, that it speaks to you. But if it's not, just pick it up and learn about some messy people who are probably struggling with similar things to what a lot of us have
Yeah.
going on today.
Yeah. Is there any one story or topic or chapter, I'm not sure how you divided up your 60 days, that spoke to you personally more than the others? That even as you were writing, I know for us when we're writing something, there's that time, it's a joke around the office because I always push away from the desk and put my hands up on my head because it's one of those moments where it's like the Lord kind of imprints something on me it was just for me. It wasn't actually for someone else. It was, and sometimes I make it in the one I'm writing and sometimes it doesn't. Um,
Yeah.
but were there any of those push away from the desk moments and was like, wow, that is good? Where you're like, you
Yeah.
wrote it and you're like, dang, that's good.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty familiar story to many of us, but the story of Elijah and the showdown with the prophets of Baal. So Elijah is a prophet, and then there's this other set of prophets who are following a different God, and they have this showdown, and Elijah is victorious. So in modern context, think of any situation in your life that's high pressure and you prevail. So a
Yeah.
meeting, a battle, going to rescue someone, conflict with your spouse, it turns out well, just any high pressure situation. So it turns out well. And then the next thing we know, he's in the desert saying, like, God, I'm done. Like,
Right.
I want to die. Like, and so it's such an opposite thing. He's not spiking the ball or having a party or feeling confident. Instead, he's a wreck. And
Yeah.
what God does is say, take a nap and have a snack. Like he sends angels to him with food. And I love that because, God's not like, you are in so much trouble. Did you not just see what I accomplished? Like he's literally just witnessed a miracle. And instead, like, it's just such a human thing. And I think we forget, that we just get exhausted. And he was highly anxious through this whole thing. And we forget anxiety of any kind is exhausting, even if the
Right.
outcome turns out to be what we want. And that
Yes.
we are humans who are not just spirit, but mind and heart and body. And sometimes we overcomplicate it. When we're anxious, sometimes what we need is a nap and a snack.
I
We
love
need to
it.
treat ourselves like kindergartners.
Honestly, I feel like that should have been the title of the book. Like, what you need is a nap and a snack,
A nap and a
I'm
snack.
sure the publisher would have approved that, as a nap and a snack. Maybe that could be like your new podcast, and like the first half is just snacking, and the next half is you invite people to take a nap with you. Maybe that's
Yeah.
the next idea. No,
So
but
I
I
think
love
when
that.
we're Yeah, and I think when we're anxious, we can tend to try to solve the big problem, the thing that we are anxious about. And I think that story tells me start small and ask, okay, I'm anxious right now. What is the most basic thing I can do about that?
Right.
Do I need to eat? Do I need to sleep? Do I need to take a drink of water? Do I need to reach out to someone safe? Like, start with something small and
Yeah.
get ourselves to a place where we feel more stable. And then maybe we can think about the big issue behind the anxiety. But if we can just do that one thing, just flip that funnel where we don't start with the biggest thing of all when we're anxious, I think that alone can be a game changer.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so good. I think that this topic of anxiety, it seems to be everywhere. I mean, you look at 1 in 3 college students now takes a daily anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication, right, in our country. I mean, you have some of this data that's seemingly quite alarming, right? I mean, you would look at this and say that's probably not a great data point that you're like, oh, good, we're all on the verge of cracking all the time. We all have to have this substance to sort of cope. And there's lots of different I think theories as to why that is. Many people say, well, it's the input of information. It's all social media. Some people blame. I guess in all of your research, you looked at some of the neuroscience and cognitive science and things of that nature. Why do you suppose? Why do you think that anxiety suddenly is um, such a prevalent subject matter? Why is it that so many of us struggle with it?
Yeah, I think one is there's more awareness, which I think can be helpful. So,
Mm,
like I said, when I was that 8-year-old kid, I got told, oh, it's stress. We weren't
right,
using the terminology today. I also
right.
think we just have so much coming at us all the time. And anxiety is related to our nervous systems. We think of it as just a thought thing. I have anxious thoughts, but really it's our nervous systems being overloaded beyond
Mm,
their capacity to handle what's happening. So, say as humans, we are meant to be at a 6. Life's
right,
moderately stressful, where our environment, when you factor in social media and especially events of the last few years, we're probably at an 8.5 most of the
right.
time.
All the time,
So
right.
there's a real mismatch between, I think, the level we're created to operate at as humans and what we need to deal with every day. And
Hmm.
so I think that each of us, that means we have to pause and say, what can my system handle? Like me as an
Hmm.
introvert, it's lower, which means I have no notifications on ever. Because if I do, it makes me
Yeah,
really anxious. Where you
right,
as an extrovert may say, you know what, actually opposite stressful for me. In our culture, isolation can happen without it meaning to. I need to make sure I'm getting more people in my life. And
right.
so I think saying, am I out of sync with the level of engagement that works best for my nervous system, which may push me into anxiety? And what are some adjustments I can start making in my life instead of just
Yeah,
saying whatever the culture is putting on me must be the right fit?
right.
Because it's not going to be really for any of us. And so I think that is a lot of it is we just have a lot coming at us all the time right now, and
Yeah.
that leads to anxiety.
Yeah, in season 1 of our show, this is season 3, and in season 1 we had 3 of us that hosted every episode, and one of the things we talked about was the difference between worry, anxiety, and stress and fear, and we really outlined what are the differences between those 4 words, because you are right in that generationally it's different, but I think also sometimes it's even different. Like if I'm around my family and I say, how are you doing? Dad will say, oh, I'm kind of worried about this thing at work. Versus a 20 something will say, like, I have a lot of anxiety about this thing at work.
Hmm.
And it's fascinating
Yeah.
because one of those is a clinical issue and one is a
Hmm.
experience that is a human condition that we all have, which is a different need of control and issue. And so we spent a lot of time outlining that sort of in season 1. So if you're listening to this and you want to go back and look at that episode, it's called what exactly is anxiety or something like that is the title of that. But go back to listen to that in season 1 where we kind of outline the differences. But as we talk about this topic, I feel like one of the things that I get a little bit anxious, but maybe nervous would be a better word about is I feel like there's a lot of money to be made off of people feeling worried and anxious. And I look at these bookshelves, I look at the stress balls and the oils and the watches and the bands and the medicines and I mean, this billion-dollar industry has been created of really telling us, hey, you shouldn't feel stress, you shouldn't feel anxiety, you should feel better. And they all kind of promise the same thing, which is more peace, right? They all promise more peace. But yet somehow a lot of us, we end up chasing peace promise to peace promise to peace promise. And we never quite get there. We feel like we're sort of chasing this elusive promise that we quite never receive. I guess one of the things that I saw in even the summary of your book was this idea like you don't have to keep putting up with your anxiety. You said you don't have to stay stuck in the old worries, that we can embrace 1 Peter 5, I think you said, where, it's cast your cares on the Lord because he cares for you, right? So talk to us, what does it look like to say, I'm not going to keep chasing this promise of peace, but I'm going to actually take hold of it? How do we actually do that? And I know that's a hard question, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah, and really, I think the goal, we tend to think of anxiety as something to eliminate. But the reality is, we are going to be anxious as long as we are humans on this earth.
Yeah,
It's just about not letting anxiety control us. And we
good.
tend to think of anxiety as, oh, peace must be the absence of something. Peace is the absence of anxiety. But I think
Right.
peace is more an overall sense of well being. And so I encourage people to say, you know what? Studies have actually shown that people who struggle with anxiety also often report high levels of meaning in their
Mm-hmm.
lives, which you would think, what? But if you think
Right.
about what makes you anxious, like your children make you anxious, but they also add joy to your life, And so,
Right.
or like we've been talked about earlier, like people who struggle with anxiety also tend to have high empathy. And so I think it's about, okay, life is never going to be a beer commercial as much as any of us, as much as we love that, like that's
Right.
not the goal. It's just to be able to say, this is a part of my life. It's going to continue being a part of my life, but it doesn't have to
Yes.
control me. So, where are the areas where I truly feel like anxiety sometimes gets the best of me? And then, what are
Right.
some strategies I can put in place to know when that happens, I can take the reins back? And so, that's
Wow.
really the goal of this book is by the end of this time, one, you're educated about understanding what anxiety is,
Right. What's going on?
where
Mm-hmm.
where it's actually a struggle, where it is something to embrace. There are times to embrace it. We become anxious for a reason. We can learn from it, and
Right.
then I have the tools and strategies I need that when anxiety comes up for me, I can get it back to a manageable place. And so I agree. I think that a lot of the vague promises of do this and you'll experience peace are not attainable, and they're also
Right.
not what we really want, right?
That's it.
Like
And
we
I
don't
mean, I think that's
want,
so good.
yeah. So so that would be my hope is we can't eliminate it, but I do think we can manage it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we say a lot of times that healing from trauma does not equate to the absence of symptoms, right?
Yes.
That I think but that's sort of what I think the cultural movement is. Peace, like you said, is the absence of anxiety, which I don't think is true. Obviously, Jesus had stress and anxiety. I mean, right? I mean, obviously before this crucifixion, clearly
Yeah.
we see him in angst. I mean, severe angst about it. And so we can see that's that. And if it's true that it is a human emotion, well, then we have to believe that it was a gift from God, right? That, like you said, there's times that it empowers us to do things that without it, we probably wouldn't get motivated. I mean, if we never had any anxiety, we'd probably just sit around all day long, I don't know, looking at Instagram or something. I don't know what we would do. I don't know. We'd probably just get nothing done. And so um, I think that's a really good point is that peace is not necessarily the absence of anxiety, right? I think that's something that maybe some of our listeners really need to hear today. If you've been kind of chasing that promise of peace, is realizing that it's really saying, okay, there's a difference between experiencing anxiety as a guarantee, which I think was what you just said, but it's not controlling anymore. And being able to find that delicate balance there. Did I recap that pretty well? Is that close to what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
big nugget for me. That's a big nugget from this for me.
And biologically, anxiety even uses the same circuitry as we use for excitement. And so I
Oh, cool.
hesitate sometimes to say that because, of course, it's not, you can't just flip yourself from one to the other, but you can move that direction, right? Or even to say, okay, maybe anxiety isn't as scary as I think it is, not including like panic attacks
Of
or,
course.
PTSD. I always want to be really sensitive to that. But
Yeah.
some of just the everyday anxiety where we just tell ourselves, stop being anxious, stop being anxious, like that actually raises the level because our system says, you're not hearing me, so I'm going to get more anxious. If we can just say, all right, anxiety, what are you trying to tell me right now about what really matters to me? Because
Yes.
we get anxious about what really matters to us. We get anxious about our kids because we love them. We get anxious about our work because it's important in our lives. And so the only way we would never have anxiety is if we didn't care about anything or we weren't affected as humans by anything. And so if we can learn to say, okay, I don't like my anxiety, it's uncomfortable and annoying, and I wish it would go away, but I can learn from it. I can listen to it. It can tell me what I'm afraid of, what I really care about, what's off in my life. Sometimes it's a warning sign that we need to pay attention to. If we're always anxious around a certain person, there's probably something there that we need to notice. Right. And so I think being gentler with our anxiety instead of just, I'm going to banish you because you make me feel like a bad person and I think I'm not supposed to have you hanging around, and instead say, okay, you're not in charge, but I'm listening. Yeah. You know, what can I learn here, and how can I manage you in a way that leads to more helpful outcomes instead of just saying, oh, I should never experience this at all.
Man, truth bombs, dropping truth bombs on us there. That is so good. The book is What Your Mind Needs for Anxious Moments. It's coming out here in just a few days, depending on when you listen to this. It's coming out towards the end of September, so make sure to go pick that up. The subtitle is A 60-Day Guide to Take Control of Your Thoughts, and I know all of us need to take control of our thoughts. It's Holley Gerth. It's her newest book. Make sure to go check that out on Amazon. And as I said, go order it, leave a review, help her with the new book, obviously. And I know you will not be disappointed. In 60 days, obviously, you'll probably cover a lot of ground, I would imagine. And not to mention, you're getting a good daily Bible study in there as a side byproduct of focusing on your anxiety, which is a double win. Holley, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. We really appreciated you having setting aside time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And to everybody else at home, as we always sign off, keep moving forward as we overcome trauma together.